to give me some l'chaim? Whatever. L'chaim. Freilich and Chanukah, everyone. Freilich Zot Chanukah. L'chaim. May the light of Chanukah illuminate each of and every one of our lives. Begashmis and Beruchnius. Light has the power to bring all the brachas and all the blessings. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, light, Ein Sof, in general, is the ultimate metaphor for every type of transmission that comes from the Eibishter to us. So when we celebrate Chanukah and the Chanukah Festival of Lights, it immediately comes to mind that power. So we'll talk about that some more, but it's always good to begin with a bracha, Peschim bebracha. Each of us has our own unique journey in life and our unique challenges. Yoda inish benafshe, everyone knows in their own heart and soul that which they're going through. And sometimes we don't always know actually. There are many things that remain somewhat in the, we'll call it in the subconscious. So a day, a Yom Tov B'chlal, and especially a Yom Tov like Chanukah, is not just another day in the year. According to the Torah, especially when you learn Primus HaTorah, you realize that a Yom Tov is like you say, a moyad, moyadim. What does moyad come from? The word moyad means a meeting place. Who's meeting whom? It's a meeting place in time that a certain period of the year, a certain time period, that the certain doors are open, the channels are open for special brachas and for special opportunities. So it's not another day. Even though the Eibishter is with us all the time, 24/7, all year round, but nevertheless, in the language of Chassidus, there's a big seder ishtalshelus, there's a whole infrastructure, and not all the transmissions and all the amshachas are always coming down at the same time, in the same way. When there's an eis rotzen, it means that there are less barriers and less impediments that allow what I call before the oir, the transmission, to arrive. Just like we say in Aseret Shemei Tshuva, it says, Dirsha Hashem b'motzei, b'yesei karua, b'yesei karuv, that you should besiege God when he's to be found and call to him when he's close. So of course the klotz kasha is, God is always close. God is always to be found. Eineid mulvade. Chaz v'shalom, God forbid to say that there are times God is closer to us and God is distant from us. But the answer is that it's from our perspective. That's from God's perspective. From the Eibishter's perspective, there's no change. But there are different times of the year and different places. Why do we daven in a shul? Why do we daven special tefillas on a certain Yom Tov or on Shabbos or even every day? The Eibishter is everywhere. Is he more in a shul than he is in the field? Is he more by the Kosel Maravia and the Beis HaMikdash or in a Mikdash Ma'at in a shul than he is in a regular street? Is he more revealed on Yom Kippur than he is in the middle of a Sunday night? That's not even a Yom Tov, the middle of a weekday. The answer is, of course not. So this is one of the places where you need to relate to, and look into Primus HaTorah that talks about this, that says that the change, the differences are not from the point of view of God, it's the point of view from us. That it's just like when you say, when the famous Torah from the Alter Rebbe, coming from Yutas Kislev before Chanukah. So one of the questions that the ministers, they saw what kind of catch they had. The Alter Rebbe was a brilliant scholar on so many levels, so they realized who they have, so they went and they took full advantage while he was in prison, and they interrogated him, but not stam questions. They asked him philosophical questions and psychological questions. And one of the questions the minister asked the Alter Rebbe was, how do you explain the pasuk that after Adam ate from the Eitz Hadas, from the tree of knowledge, so it says that the Eibishter, then Adam was ashamed, so he hid himself, he concealed himself. How do you explain that the Eibishter said to him, Ayeka, where are you? Well, the Eibishter didn't know where he was. The Eibishter knows everything. He knows he can see everything. What do you mean he can hide from the Eibishter? What does he mean by Ayeka? So the Alter Rebbe gave the minister the pshat from Rashi. So the minister was a scholar himself, and he says, that pshat I know what it says in Rashi. I don't know if he used the word pshat, but he says, that interpretation I know. They were speaking in Russian, obviously, not in Yiddish. And he said, that interpretation, I want to know what the Rebbe has to say. So the Rebbe stood up, the way the story goes, and he looked him in the eyes and said, this is a question that is asked to every human being. And the question that you're asked, because we're all children of Adam Arish, and everyone is created in the same image as Adam Arish and B'Tselem Elokim. It's a question that's asked, you lived so many years, and he actually chose the exact amount of years of this minister's life. And God is asking, what have you accomplished with your life? What are you doing? I don't recognize you. Are you living up to your destiny? Are you living up to the purpose and mission of your life? So it's not pshat that he was asking where he is physically. He knew where Adam was hiding. Sometimes you're sitting with someone by a table and they space out and you ask them, where are you? You know where they're sitting. What you mean is, where's your heart and soul? I don't feel you with me. You ever have that? Someone says, I don't feel you with me. In other words, physically I know where you are, but your spirit is not with me. So the problem was not from the point of view of the Eibishter. He knew exactly where Adam Arishan was. The problem was that Adam Arishan didn't know where he was. He was very much aligned with his purpose in life. And here, the eating of the tree of knowledge, something was severed. The Rambam explains at length in Moreh Nevuchim that he became self-conscious. The idea of self-consciousness was born, that he's no longer just a Eved Hashem, just a seamless servant of what God wants. He has his own agenda. It was a high-level agenda, but still he was already an identity of his own. It says in Sfarim, for this reason, it says that an animal will never attack a human being. Why not? Because they see the Tselem Elokim, the divine image on the face of a human being. An animal will not attack a human being. So, of course, the question is, we see animals do attack human beings. So the similar answer is given. It says, Ein Adam Meiz Ponov B'fnei Bal Cheve. Gemara says a person, that's why Moed B'miktzah is Chayiv Shvua. Someone who says, let's say you bring someone to Adin Torah and you say, you owe me $1,000. And he says, I owe you 500. So he doesn't have to prove it. All he has to do is take an oath. Why? Because Eino Demeiz B'fnei Bal Cheve. If he said nothing, I owe you nothing, then you have to have a whole court case to determine who's telling the truth. But he's saying 500, he's not going to lie in the front of a person he owes money to. So the Gevelt asked the question, what does that mean? People lie. They don't say 0, they say 500, and they're not lying. So one of I'm not sure who the mucker for it is, but one answer is, Ein Adam Meiz Ponov. He has to be an Adam. A person who's like that is not the gather of an Adam. He's not an Adam. So bottom line is that the same thing is that when the face of a human being is a Tselem Elokim, animals will not attack him. The problem is once that face gets concealed and you can't see the real person, then the animal will attack because it doesn't see the Tselem Elokim. Daniel in the Neva Arayis, in the lion's den, his face shined with the Tselem Elokim, so the lions left him alone. But the rest of us, even though we have a divine image, but sometimes it gets concealed. So then there are times in the year, an Eis Rotzen, a Yom Tov, a Chanukah, in our case, Zeis Chanukah, which opens up some doors that allows it to make it easier to reveal who we really are, as opposed to who we think we are. Very often, in dealing with different types of people, I ask people a question. I say, who are you? So everybody, when they ask you, who are you, they always answer the same thing. They give you their business card. So I say, but that's what you do. It's not who you are. Oh, yeah, good point, And some people will say, I've been doing what I do for so long, what I do has become who I am. Can you imagine? When it should be the other way around. Who you are should dictate what you do. But most of us, our jobs are not necessarily reflective of who you really are. So we could spend half our lives, who knows how long, busy with things that is not about you altogether. So who's the real you? The ayeka is concealed. So comes a day like Chanukah. Even though every yontif has its own particular gilui, so to speak. And it tells us that you have the ability on a day like this to get rid of some of these layers, some of these masks that we wear. The masks, the shrouds, the different words that we use for it. Mesochim, parsois, partitions, curtains. all the different expressions, halomes, vestadim, tzimtzumim, the things that conceal, even from yourself, who you are as opposed to what you do. So on the day of Chanukah, we have that special koyach. That special koyach. Now with Chanukah, it comes even stronger because we know the whole Chanukah was about Yisro Ne'er Min HaCheshech. Chanukah is different in very many ways because it is not a regular Yom Tov. It's not a Yom Tov like every other Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov where you celebrate. But Chanukah is because there was a tremendous darkness to the point they could not find light. It was total darkness. They couldn't find light. They couldn't find the Pach HaShemen, even one crucible of oil, let alone that should burn for 8 days. And the discovery of the oil and the second miracle that it burned for 8 days is the power of Chanukah. So Chanukah is specifically focused, especially when you make it, you relate it personally, it's focused on what? On darkness. Now here I must say, I'm here in a Kehillah Kadesha, Pomona, of very many holy Jews, right? And, but I have to be honest, I usually deal with people who are more secular than you are, at least b'chitzenius. What I mean by that is that there you can't get away and just tell them, my Chanukah, you open up Masechta Shabbos, what's Chanukah? And it says, okay, that on that day, b'chafei b'kislev, they discovered the oil, and that's why they light every year, the next year, they, b'shana haba, we light menorah. For us, those that went to yeshiva, this is like common knowledge. But sometimes when something is common, meaning something you learned so many times, it's a thing called, we take it for granted. We don't necessarily appreciate what it is. So there's an expression in Tanakh that's called mitzvahs anoshim melumoda. This is not a Chassidish expression, it's an expression from the Eibishter to the Novi, mitzvahs anoshim melumoda, doing mechanical mitzvahs, robotic, by rote. In other words, it doesn't necessarily have any inner meaning. You do it because you grew up with it. You grew up with it. I remember once, there's the famous Yerushalmi that says that one of the Amoraim went into shul. They were davening, and he heard moedim. So it says, Menafshei kara. He automatically bowed down. Didn't even have to think about it, because he was trained. You hear moedim, you bow down. So most people, when you learn that Gemara, it sounds gewaltig, unbelievable. The guy is so trained, doesn't even have to think about it. He's so mechanical, he's so automatic. But there's also another interpretation, that it's actually a chsad, l'grius. It's not a positive, it's a negative. It means he's not even thinking about it. He's doing it mechanically. So it's better than nothing, perhaps, but without any thought, without any intention. So what is a robotic Jew going to look like, a mechanical Jew? Is a person that goes through cultural routines. You grew up with it, and that's why you do it. And the Eibishter is very, very harsh. In the Haftarah of Shabbos Chazain, and the other Haftarah is connected to the 9 days and that period of the year. Very, very harsh. Where he talks about he doesn't want to have robotic mitzvahs. He speaks in extremely harsh terms. When you read those psukim, it can happen at sitter. How harsh the Eibishter is about not wanting to have mechanical mitzvahs. Now, so good. Api halacha, we can go into a whole chkira here. Is it better than nothing? Yeah, but it says also a mitzvah without kavanah is a guf b'lei neshama. In simple English, I don't want to sound morbid, especially Chanukah night, but a body without a soul is called a corpse. It's not something that we actually consider to be a big bracha. What do they say in the Elam HaBrisk? They say that when a person passes away, for nagavri is gevor nachefza. That's what they say. So corpse is not exactly considered a compliment. So to say that someone's doing mitzvahs like a corpse is very harsh. Now, of course, we know there are mitzvahs that don't need kavanah, like tzedakah and other mitzvahs that the main thing is the ma'aseh b'peil, the action. But even there, with kavanah is much better. And then there are mitzvahs that without kavanah, it's li'ikuva. You can't do the mitzvah. Mitzvah is meaningless without intention. About davening is a big question because it says the Shalah and others write that tefillah b'lei kavanah is kiguf b'lei neshama. So do you daven without kavanah? Does it have any value? That's a discussion, maybe. The Eibishter puts the kavanah in, or however you explain it. But these are very strong words. And I can tell you, growing up, I don't know your own backgrounds, but growing up in the yeshiva world, where I grew up, in the Chabad, Chassidish yeshivas, Temchet Mimim, in Bedford and Dean, and then later Ocean Parkway and the Lubavitch yeshivas. And then learning, meeting other people from different yeshivas, I saw there was a lot of commonalities. That a lot of things you learn and they become cultural icons, meaning you do it, almost mechanically, without even thinking twice. When do you begin to appreciate Yiddishkeit, including Chanukah? You know when? Like the Gemara says, "Mitalmida yesem mekulam." When the Tana was asked the question, "Where did you learn what you know?" So he said, "I learned much from my rabbeisai, from my teachers, even more from my friends, my colleagues, chaverim. And Talmidai, from my students, I learned most." Even though you could say the students are lesser, they have lesser knowledge, lesser training, lesser experience. Why? Because when you have to explain it to someone that's not equal to you, you have to bring it down to someone else, then you're forced to dig deeper and explain in a way you can't take anything for granted. Because as you talk to someone that was as your colleague or your teacher, you can just use language everybody's used to. But then suddenly someone says, "Okay, can you explain to me, I'm a Jew that never heard about Chanukah before in my life. Can you explain to me why exactly do we light the menorah on Chanukah? And why is it important for me to do? And why should I do it? I have so many other things I could be doing." So the usual response from a, let's call it, what shall we say, FFB? How do we define this category? I'm not sure. Whatever you call it, is some will say, "That's what God said you should do, and that's it." You don't ask questions. Kabbalah sel, nasa v'nishma. That's what some people answer. Others dismiss the person altogether. They don't even want to talk to someone like that. And but what do you say to a person like this? Do you feel even a responsibility that you have to answer this question? Or you just write him off and say, "Okay, what can you do? Rachmanus on him. Tinik shenishba." That's already kind words. Peishi Yisrael, Arosha. I mean, all kinds of terminology that is brought from the different chazal that people use. But the bottom line is, if it was your brother or your sister that asked you that question, would you also say that? So then, and this is not a hypothetical, by the way. I've had this conversation as many times. I'm just repeating some of my conversations. Someone said to me once, "My brother and sister would never ask such a question." Okay, gewaldig. It's a hypothetical. Imagine your brother and sister ask the question, We Jews know there's a thing called a heichet timtze. Even if it didn't happen, imagine it happened. Okay, imagine. Okay, let me imagine. I'd give him a port fresk and port petch and tell him, "Go light Chanukah and stop asking so many questions." You get the idea. But when you're really out there, and I was blessed to be out there in many ways, and meeting Jews of all colors and stripes and persuasions, and those that are affiliated and not affiliated, and many, yes, Tineka Shenishbu that don't know better, not at their fault at all. It forces you to have to answer the question. You can't just say it's a mitzvah. You could say it, but I don't know how much impact it will have. You have to personalize it. And this already takes us out of our comfort zone. Because to understand that 3,000 years ago, there was a miracle, a Hanukkah miracle, and the Pach Hashem, and then it burned 8 days, and we honor that. Okay, so that's what we do. We commemorate things, just like we remember Yetzias Mitzrayim and remember other miracles, Purim. Remember the Nes Chanukah. Someone will ask you, what does it mean to you right now personally? Not mitzvahs anoshim u'lamada. Do you have an answer for that? Which means, in more to put it even sharper terms, how is Chanukah indispensable to your life? What does it teach you that without Chanukah you would be missing something important? And the same thing you can ask about everything. You go Shabbos and hear Kriyas HaTorah, and in the shul you'll find people who make sure that the Balkeira, every mistake is pointed out, especially if you have a personal agenda with the Balkeira, or you think you should be the Balkeira, And then if you ask a person like that, say to them, "Okay, so what's the message in this week's Pasha for your life?" People look, I've asked this question many times. They look at me, they say, "But you're medayik in every letter." Well, give me one lesson. I never heard such a question before. So I grew up, as I said, in Chabad. I was zeichet to be a chazer and a maniach. It's a terminology in the Chabad lingo of someone who had this chus, the merit, to remember hours and hours of the Rebbe's Farbrengens. And then a maniach means someone who wrote it down after Shabbos and Yom Tov and published it. So, being someone in that line of work, I used to always say to myself, like, what is the most repeated statement that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe, would say more than any other statement? And I asked many of my own colleagues. So many people say the Rebbe's most popular statement is Hamaiso Ika, from the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The action is paramount. Hamaisa hu ileya talmudik ela hamaisa. Action. It's true that the Rebbe did repeat that many, many, many times, but there's something even more repeated. And that is the expression Torah Meloshen Hera. Torah comes from the word Hera. Now, where does it say that? It's a Sefer HaRadak, Pirush HaRadak, Sefer HaMichel, the Sforim that talk about Digduk. It's not the Sefer that most of us learn. That's where it says Torah Meloshen Hera. Now, Hera in English means directive, guidance. That's the word Torah. Now, you could think, okay, what's the big chiddush? And the Rebbe has repeated it so many times. You heard it once. How many times does it have to be repeated? Because the single most lacking element in Yiddishkeit today, especially in the frum world, the Hira B'chaim of the Torah. How many people, when they have an issue with Shalom Bayis, or their children, or in their personal lives, are going to open up a Torah to look for answers? You go to a Rav when you want to know if the chicken is kosher, or you have an argument with someone, or you want to know when the Shkia is, or if your child was born Bein Hashmoshes on Friday, when they make the bris. That's where we go to Torah. Basically, religious ritual matters. Personal matters. Most people, first of all, when they have personal issues, they don't go to anybody. In the modern lingo, it's called denial. They ignore it. When there's no choice and you have to deal with it, most people will go, maybe the thing called therapy. If it's a religious therapy, whatever it is. But nobody even thinks to open up a Parsha Sashavua and look inside the Parsha. Maybe there's an answer there. As a matter of fact, I said this once to a very Chredish crowd, even more Chredish than this one. No insult, I hope. Oh, yeah. Yes. We have a long night to talk about that, yeah. And they laughed. They laughed when I suggested about looking in the Parsha. No one even had a havamina to think that way. Now, I'm not here to be critical. I'm just here to point out it's an observation. It's an observation. The observation leads to a lot of consequences. Because meklal lava tishmei and meklal lava tishmei that if you don't find an answer in the Torah, then most people go away saying there is no answer. That's why we don't look there. Not my father, not my mother, not my teacher, not my malamed, my mashpia, Rosh Hashiva, etc., etc. So I can tell you that I was trained sitting at the feet of the Rebbe and realizing that the fact that he repeats it so many times, sometimes in one Farbrengen, he can repeat it 10 times, knowing that he said it already once, because to drive that point home is very difficult, especially when you're already used to it. So here we're finishing Chanukah. Tonight is Zeis Chanukah, the last night of Chanukah. It's 8 days. We light eight lichtlach, and there's a Svarim, plenty of discussions and all the halachic nuances and the arguments and splitting hairs back and forth, back and forth. But the simple question, how can this help us in our lives today in 2021, Tovshin Pei Beis, whatever it is we're dealing with? Unfortunately, we were not trained to ask that question. And Shalas Chochem Chetzi Tshuva. When you ask the right questions, you're already halfway to the answer. So, we'll say L'chaim, sing a niggin, and then we'll dig a little deeper and go into this. L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. Sure? L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Around, this may be, just trying to remember, in the 80s, maybe 87, 88, 86. That would be 30 years ago at least, maybe more than 35 years ago. So at the time, there's an organization called the Chai Foundation, run by Rabbi Metzger, who's now Chabad of Midtown Manhattan. And he would prepare advertisements for the New York Times several times a year, presenting a message for large audiences, New York Times readers. This is not an endorsement of the New York Times, just for the record, okay? So let's make that clear. Yeah, we don't, non-profit organizations cannot endorse politicians. So I prepared one of those ads for Chanukah, and it would go into the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he would edit it. So in this particular ad, I decided to use some of my poetic skills, and I titled it Whispering Flames. And the first line of the ad, it was a short ad, but the message was based on the Frierdiker Rebbe's statement. You have to listen to the story that the flames tell us. So that was the concept of whispering flames. The flames are whispering a story to us. And then it had like, I think 5 or 6 messages that we learned from the candles. The idea that we have to always bring light into the world. Mailam B'Kedesh, always grow. We light at night. And by the door facing outward, because we can illuminate the darkness. Talked about the colors of the flames. It was like we have 5 or 6 messages, so to speak, stories that listening to the story of the flames. Okay. The Rebbe edited it quite extensively. And on the word whispering flames, the word whispering, the Rebbe circled the word whispering, and he wrote, it's not meant to be silent. Ki'im pesumenisa. In other words, the word whispering suggests a type of almost doing things more discreet or quietly. So even though, obviously, flames don't whisper nor speak, it was a manner of expression. I was not insulted that the Rebbe didn't appreciate my poetry, because the message was the Rebbe didn't want to give even a moment of thought that anybody should consider that this is meant to be something quiet. So just in that word, you can learn volumes of lessons. This became the basis. I don't know if you recall, but we even went to the Supreme Court. The question of public menorahs, where actually Jews were the ones that opposed it more than anyone. That keep the menorah indoors. Why do you have to celebrate your Judaism in the street? It'll just provoke anti-Semitism, etc., etc. So one of the big arguments was that the message of Chanukah is part and parcel. It's not a religious message per se for Jews alone. That was the argument. You can't have it in a public square because it's separation of church and state. And the response was that the message is an American message, the message of freedoms, liberty, Masarti Giborim Biyad Chaloshim, that quality was more powerful than quantity. And that case won in the court, and therefore they allowed public menedas. Now, whose idea was a public meneda was the Rebbe. Understanding Persum and Nisa, so we always learn halacha, Persum and Nisa is in a somewhat limited way. Here suddenly became a global statement that even in public squares and public celebration, that reminds people, wherever they are, of the message of Chanukah. There are other details that Rebbe edited, but I want to go into them right now. They were very interesting. Just give you one more just as an example. I wrote that as the colors of the flame change, look, you have yellow, red, white, blue, so too the different hues and colors and shades of our lives are all part of the story of light. In other words, light is not just plain white light. There's many dimensions. There are times the light is a little darker, sometimes more bright. So the Rebbe circled the world as the colors of the light flame change. The Rebbe wrote, since when do they change? They don't change. Yellow doesn't become red, and the red doesn't become blue. They always remain the same color. So even precision like that, as I said, I can go through this, but I don't want to go through. My point that I want to lead to is what I said before. How to make it relevant. Now, I have a program, actually, that was broadcast tonight. I recorded it because of this Fabringen, where I answer questions to people, personal questions. They're mostly anonymous, so I don't know who writes it, and it's not relevant. So someone wrote a question, which I think is a good place to really drive the point home. He said that in the Maimorim of Chassidus on Chanukah, the word Chanukah, which is also an interesting thing, that Chanukah has a name called Chanukah. The Chanukah comes from the word chinuch, Chanukas, Hamizbeach, Chanukas, Hameneda, it's the dedication. Why is it called Chanukah? Because after the Greeks defiled and desecrated the temple, especially the Meneda, the Mizbeach, so the miracle was that it was rededicated, Chanukah. Like we said, we'll read tomorrow in the Kriya, Chanukas HaMizbeach. The Kriya Satera, the reading of the Torah of all the days of Chanukah, is about, from Parsha Nosei, the dedication of the Mishkan, of the temple. So Chassidus, it talks about that when you dedicate something, you always see, like when you make a dedication of a building, or dedication of a Sefer Torah, or a dedication of launching a new project. You always see you make a big party, and you give out gifts, and it's a whole event. So the Alter Rebbe explains in Chassidus, the reason for that is because since Kol Ascholos Koshes, all beginnings are difficult. So to launch something, you put a special energy, you make a party, you make a whole event. It's like it gives the koyach to launch something, to overcome the challenges in the beginning of it. And he gives an example of children. That children, when you fear them arayin firinish, in cheder, you make a whole thing. You throw them candies, you wrap them in a talis, you make a party. Because when someone's going into a new stage in life, a new transition, you do it with a trask, with a bang. So it gives them the strength to be able to really. So this person writes to me, again, there's no name. He writes, this is very nice for someone who grew up in a healthy home. Their parents did all this for them. What do we do with someone like myself and others who grew up in an abusive home, a home where there was neglect, no parents, and we never got this the Chanukas HaChinuch, the beginning of our Chinuch. So what does Chanukah mean to us? That was the question he asked. This is a perfect example of what I said before. You're not going to hear this question in a conventional setting because it's not a shaila in halacha. It's not a question in the Gemara, not in Shas, not in Rishonim or Chreinim, in Shulchan Aruch, and so on. There you'll hear the big question of the Beis Yosef, that why is it an 8-day miracle when it was burned for 7 days? It should be a 7-day miracle. Or other such questions. More academic questions. But a personal question like that, you're usually not going to hear. Now, I don't know how you think about it. To me, a question like this is maybe the most important of all. Because here's a person that's suffering and crying, did not have a chinuch, proper one, and he's reading about the lessons from Chanukah. It doesn't seem it speaks to him. And unfortunately, in our generation, again, not mentioning names, many of our, let's call it religious establishment, has not figured out how to communicate to a person like this. So you either dismiss them as meshugah, or need help. Like I said, it's a dreid that he needs, put him in a way. or whatever it is, or just ignore. But this forces us. Does Chanukah have an answer for a person like this? And I'll take it a step further. It's not just for people like you'll say, okay, fine, there are some people like this, but the rest of us are all healthy people. We don't need such an answer. It's not true. As I said before, mitzvahs anoshim ulamoda is a very severe thing. God does not want mechanical mitzvahs. He wants, when you light the candles, to do what the Frierdiker Rebbe said, to watch them and listen to their story. And does their story reflect in your life? And what lessons do you learn? Torah meloshen heirah. Every letter, every word, every activity, every mitzvah, every minhag is meant to give us a lesson in life. And a lesson means a lesson in life. So I spoke about it tonight, so I'll just tell you briefly what I responded. I wrote him, I didn't write him. I said it because it's a program online. It's called My Life, Chassidus Applied. So I said, first of all, my heart goes out to you, besides the fact which he was hinting to that he doesn't even have a family to go to Chanukah. Most of us have a family, you have a party, you have Chanukah gelt, you have, different things. That my heart goes out to you, but you have to know that Chanukah has a lesson to you, maybe even deeper than to anyone else. And what is the lesson? If you really think about Chanukah, Chanukah was not given to people who everything is going well. It's given to someone whose light has almost been extinguished, where he cannot find a shemen zayzoch, a pach shemen even crucible of pure oil. And light has been extinguished, the light of the Beis Hamikdash. Chanukah came to address that. So if anyone has a lesson, it's a lesson to someone who grew up in a home that experienced such darkness. And suddenly, if you think about it, that makes it come alive much deeper than just, okay, something happened 3,000 years ago. The Chashmonoim, the Eden, the Yevonim, or defiled the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash rather, and the Mizbeach and the Menorah. Is there a Chanukah going on right now? Or is it just a thing from the past? We're remembering past events. We say, B'yomim aheim bizman hazeh. Where's the bizman hazeh? B'yomim aheim, fine. The same question you can ask about everything in Yiddishkeit. Now is not the time of Pesach and the Seder. But you ever think about it? It says, when we sit by the Seder, we're supposed to recreate what happened by Yetzias Mitzrayim. B'chol der v'der chayav adam liras es atzmei kula yotzim Mitzrayim. Did any of you ever visit Mitzrayim, B'chlal? And even if you did, you imagine in every generation as if we left Egypt? Why should we imagine left? How could we even imagine? We weren't slaves. We were born in freedom. So mainly you could say, yes, the Holocaust generation or the generation under Stalin. But most of us are a bunch of American spoiled kids. We never were in Mitzrayim, nothing close to it. So how could we even be expected to be recreating it, not just remembering? This forces you to have to look in deeper, and this is what's called Nishmosa Daraisa, the Neshama of the Torah. We're not just doing a mechanical Seder, we actually have to find the Mitzrayim within us. And for that matter, every character and personality in the Torah, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Aaron, the good people and the villains, all of them, they are all meant to be personalities that are what we call archetypes within each one of us. So when we read their story, it's our story. That's when the Torah comes alive. You don't have that, you have a disconnect between Torah and your life. And that's simple it's plain and simple as that. So here, what I said, I said it much briefer, I'm elaborating more here. So I said, an Adarab, the Chanukah lesson is telling you that even if you grow up in a home where there's no pach shemen to be found, you can't find one drop of pure oil. There's no innocence. There's no sensitivity. And it seems hopeless. And yet the Chanukah story is that it's not hopeless. That inside each of us is burning a pilot flame. It's called Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. It's a posuk in Mishlei, in case you're wondering. It's not from a Chassidish Maimer. And it means that the soul of a human being is the flame of God. And that Ner Mitzvah, the Ner Mitzvah is compared to a flame, a candle. And a Torah is compared to light. And this is a story of our lives. Everyone has moments of darkness. And that's why Chanukah is such a powerful lesson. You know, if you look at Chanukah, it seems in every possible way, seems odd. Chanukah was meant to what? Rededicate the menorah that was defiled, right? Now the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, in every possible way, is different than Chanukah. The menorah was of 7 branches, the menorah. Chanukah is 8. The menorah was lit primarily in the morning. Chanukah is lit b'shetishka chama, by sundown. Chanukah, the menorah is lit inside the Beis Hamikdash. Chanukah is lit al Pesach Beisim Bachutz. There's almost like no area that Chanukah is similar to the Beis Hamikdash. How do you explain it? So there's the halachic explanation, because we have to make a distinction between the menorah and the Beis Hamikdash. We don't create something that's exact replica. But the deeper reason is because that's the story of Chanukah. The famous Ramban, beginning of Parsha Ba'al Escha, the Ramban says, Haneres halolu, talk about Ba'al Escha as Haneres. So though it's a ner tamid, the flame in the Beis Hamikdash was supposed to burn forever. And yet, we see after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, the destruction of the first temple and then the second, the flame stopped burning. Haneres halolu, says the Ramban, Chanukah. These flames, Einam P'tein Le'elam, they never will burn out. They will never be extinguished. Because, in the language of halacha, it says, Ashtar sheyotzo lo v'irur. If you have a contract, and no one challenged this contract, it could always be challenged and proven to be a false contract or distorted or forgery. But the halacha is, if somebody appealed and challenged a contract and it was upheld, Shtar sheyotzo lo v'irur, and then it was Kayim, was Bezdin, upheld it, you no longer can appeal it. I mean, similar constitutional laws has a similar basis that you can appeal once, twice, 3 times, but once you appeal to the Supreme Court, after that, you can't appeal. So the strange twist here is that something that's challenged actually becomes stronger than something that's not challenged, because it makes it stronger, because now it withstood the challenge, and now it can no longer be challenged. I mean, in psychology, the concept is that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, basically. Or in the Lashon HaKosov, in the Pasuk, it says, Kashayano Esam, Ken Yirbe V'chen Yifritz. As the Jews were oppressed and afflicted in Mitzrayim, in direct proportion, they blossomed and they flourished. This is the foundation of all healing in the secular world, in any world, that negative things are never an end in themselves. They can make you stronger. What is more powerful message in Chanukah than that? That's what Chanukah is saying. That the Beis Hamikdash even, those flames, they ended up being extinguished. Mashiach comes, Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, it will be rebuilt, and then it will be a binyan nitzchi. It will burn forever. But in Golus, the only flames that can burn in a dark place are flames that come from darkness, because darkness does not extinguish it. If you go through darkness and you still stand strong, you know that you no longer can ever be destroyed. So Chanukah really, in different terms, is the message of being indestructible, that there's nothing on earth that can burn out your fire. Simple as that. You may not always see where it's going to come from, just like the Jews didn't know where they're going to find this small crucible, pach shemen, but they found it. So that's why we remember it. It's not just it was a miracle that happened then, the Beis Hamikdash, and they continued learning the menorah. It's a miracle that's happening all the time. If you ask anyone the question, what is the secret to Jewish survival? How do we make it after the Holocaust? And how did we make it after the pogroms? And after the Inquisition and the Crusaders? And yes, in the destruction of all we had it because Haneres Halola in the P'tein Le'elam, because what was our adversity, our adversaries made us stronger, not weaker. They say, I don't know who they said it, but they say about people in general, maybe about Jewish people, that were like a tea bag. You don't know how strong you are until you put it into hot water. A tea bag looks like nothing on its own. You put it in hot water, oh, wow, it suddenly becomes potent. Every healing, I would challenge you to find any system in psychology today that's not based on this principle. The truth is, they took it from us, not us from them. This is the story of Chanukah. Chanukah is a message of hope in the most profound way possible. I remember it was in 1989, Tov Shin Nun. Chanukah. So as I mentioned, I had the schus to be a chayzer and a maniach writing the Rebbe's Farbrengens. So a very interesting Farbrengen that Shabbos, Vayeshev, Tov Shenun. It was Chanukah time. Chanukah also is in this part of the hemisphere, is also in the cold beginning of the winter. So the Rebbe asked a question. He said, by Purim and Chanukah have a lot of similarities. To the point that even in the Rambam, it's not two separate halachas. He calls it halachas, Hilchas, Megillah, and Chanukah. All in one hemshech. So, it's been pointed out that Al Pi Kabbalah, some say that Rambam knew Kabbalah, at least the end of his days. Al Pi Kabbalah, Purim and Chanukah are the two spheres of Netzach and Hoid. And there are two opinions, which one is which. So the Rebbe once said that it could be the Rambam knowing that, that's why he brought Chanukah and Megillah are two different halachas altogether. But they're together in the Rambam. So here's the question. Purim has a Megillah. Megillah Esther. And yes, Kusfuni L'Deira, it was Esther made a special bakosha request by the Sanhedrin, and they granted, okay, a Megillah. What about Chanukah? Why does Chanukah not have a Megillah? And we know there is a Megillah. There's a Megillah called Megillas Antiochus. There's a Megillas, there's other documents that never made it in the Kisvei Kodesh. Why not? Why is it different? So the Rebbe answered a very beautiful and very simple answer. Of all the Yomim Tovim by Jews, the only Yom Tov that's celebrated outside of the home is Chanukah. Pesach is the Seder is at home. Purim is a Suda at home. Megillah in the shul, or wherever you believe it. Every Yom Tov is celebrated at home. Chanukah is al Pesach Beisim Mebachutz. The only one that's like that. Why? Because the whole point of Chanukah is to transform the chutz, the darkness. Tishkar Chamo. The darkness of night and the darkness of time, both at night and also on the outside, chutz, to the outside. So what better way to demonstrate that is when you have a Megillah is for Kisvei Kodesh. It's something of holiness. Chanukah has no Megillah at all, because it comes to demonstrate that Chanukah is a holiday that is not even documented in an official Megillah. And even the Megillah that we do know is not called Megillas Esther, it's called Megillas Antiochus. Why wouldn't it be called Megillas Yehuda Maccabi, or Yechanan Kohen Gadol, or someone like that? Why do you call it Antiochus? Since when? It would be like Megillas Esther would be called Megillas Haman. Because Chanukah is focusing that even the darkest, even Antiochus in our lives, can also be transformed. That was the gist of it. So, as I said, I didn't say all this tonight in my program, but I did say the point of it was that on the contrary, if you grew up in a home where there was challenges and there was darkness, and you did not have the chinuch, the chanukas that a child deserves, every child deserves, so Chanukah has a very profound message that you too can discover it. Maybe you have to discover it in different ways. So there's one example of how Chanukah can literally change and save a person's life. And I've seen it with my own eyes, that when you apply the messages of Torah and mitzvahs, in this case Chanukah, to a person's personal life, not only does the Torah come alive in a personal way, but the person's life can be changed. And that is what is required, especially in our day and age. 500 years ago, when 99.999, every Jew, except a few Yetzim and Aklal exceptions, was a frum Jew, grew up in a frum environment. So maybe all this did not have to be spelled out. Because you know what? Yerushalayim was picked up from the smell of the chicken soup in your grandmother's kitchen. It was a pure world. It was insulated. It was isolated. You couldn't even assimilate if you wanted to. But in a world like ours, where there are no such boundaries anymore or barriers, there's no such thing as a ghetto. And even if you think you're completely protected in your womb or in the cocoon of Yiddishkeit, all you need is this. And those walls come down. All you need is a phone. And suddenly all these boundaries are not there. So today, we need to dig deeper and discover these deeper messages, especially in Chanukah, and how it relates to our lives. Because number one, we have to make Yiddishkeit come alive in a passionate way. And if people don't feel it's relevant to me, they're going to do something that is relevant to them. It's the first law in all marketing. You want someone to buy your product, it has to be relevant to them. Even if it's garbage, you got to convince them it's relevant. There's a lot of options today. So why would someone choose Yiddishkeit as their option? Besides for the mechanical reasons I mentioned before, or guilt, or not wanting to break their parents' hearts, or whatever it is. So number one, relevance is critical. Number two, it actually has answers. If the Eibishter created the world, and I say if, I mean that he created the world. So he's the cosmic engineer. So you would imagine if you want to know what makes the world work better, who do you go to if you want to know if a computer is going to work well or not? You go to the one who built the computer. And you look at the operator's manual. What is the operator's manual for life? The Torah. And the Medrash indeed says it's like an architect's blueprint. That God looked into the blueprint, the Torah, and with that he created the world. So if you want to know what makes you tick and what makes you a healthier person in any area of life, where's the first place you should look? In this blueprint, in the operator's manual of the engineer, the cosmic engineer, the Rebbeinu Shalom. Istakel bar Raisa or bar Alma. That's what the Zohar says. The Eibishter looked into Torah, he created the world. So how are you going to know what the world looks like if you don't look into the Torah? Most people say, oh, that's interesting. I don't see anything in the Torah that tells me anything about life. Yeah, here and there, there's a nice word or inspiration. Ahavas Yisrael is a very beautiful mitzvah. But most of the Torah, Parshas Mitzvah, Saziriah, even this week's Parsha, talk about Yosef and his brothers reuniting and so on. Where do we find it in our life? What connection does it have to us? So I can't say things haven't changed. There is already now, you have a lot of darshanim, speakers and writers who are personalizing these stories. But it's far cry from where it should be. Because I can tell you, I speak to many, many young people, young men and women, who grew up in frum homes. They have no relationship with the Torah in any personal way. By them, it's, I'll do it just to make my parents happy, or because I don't want to, mess it up with God. I make a deal with God. I don't want him to strike me with lightning or whatever, fear, or superstition for that matter. But to make it relevant, to make it like exciting, that is our greatest challenge. And that's why when it comes Chanukah, it would be a miss of me to not talk about it in that context. Yes, we could sit here and talk a lot of Chassidish feelings and Hergeshim and stories, but I wanted to really drive this point home because to me this is the key to everything. You want your children to perpetuate b'ratzon hatev, not by force or imposed or out of guilt. It has to be relevant to them. They have to see Chanukah's message. Oh wow, that's a message from my life right now. Yes, I can live with that. I can learn from it. Now I've spoken about Chanukah in general. We'll talk about Zot Chanukah as a special day. The name Zot Chanukah. So we'll talk about that as well. But I wanted to just say in another note, maybe I'll share a story which captures this in some way. But you know what? Let's say L'chaim. We'll tell the story afterwards. Say L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. Begeit this? Chaim. So why is this day called Zot Chanukah? So the literal explanation, pshat, is because, as I mentioned, tomorrow in the Kriyas HaTorah we'll read Zot Chanukah HaMizbeach. Hence, Zot Chanukah. I'll get to the story. Yeah. But that still begs explanation. I mean, that's just a technical remez. What's the meaning Zot Chanukah? Now, the literal meaning of Zot Chanukah means this is Chanukah. So some people explain because until the eighth night, the eighth day, we don't have the full-blown Chanukah. You have one, especially according to Hillel. You lit one candle, another candle. When it's Zos, you can say, this is Chanukah, the full Chanukah, like the Rosh Hashanah of Chanukah, Ches Neres, V'alocha Kebeis Hillel. When do you see that on Zos Chanukah? So like the expression, Mara Betz Boi V'Omer Zeh. You point your finger and you can see it with your own eyes. But it still requires, in very, again, on a Balabatisha level at least, so so fine, so this is Chanukah, so what? So this goes back to the famous question that Chanukah could not have happened if there was no victory in the Milchama, the Tzachar Milchama of the Maccabees and the Chashmonaim with the Yevonim, with the Greeks. Because if they had won, God forbid, there was no way you're going to relight the menorah. So the whole thing began, there was a Milchama, they won the war. So why is there almost no mention made? I mean, we say in Al Anisim about the Milchama, but the main mitzvah is my Chanukah is to light the menorah. It seems like a byproduct of the main miracle was the victory of the few winning over the many. Geberim biyad chaloshim, rabim biyad me'atim. And if you really wouldn't dig deeper, you wouldn't even know that. It's all about lighting candles. So one of the explanations given, because the Levush writes, the difference between Purim and Chanukah, that Purim, Haman wanted Rahman al-Islam destroy Hashmir al-Abid, destroy all the Jews, like a little Hitler, Yamach Shemai. Kill them physically, every man, woman, and child. The Yevonim did not want to kill the Jews. Like we say, they wanted Lashkicham Teresecha, Laviram Achukir Etzenecha, which means what they wanted was to destroy the spirit of the Jews. They didn't care, the Jews can live. Torah, no problem. A book of philosophy, a book of academic ideas, inspiration, great. But Torah Secha, that is divine, it's sacred, that's what they opposed. Mitzvahs, no problem. Ethical laws, morality. But why chukir etzenecha shekedishanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu? That's what they opposed. So therefore, Purim is celebrated by the celebration of Jewish unity, Shleich Monas, Matanos Lavyenim, Suda Seidah, and so on. Chanukah, since the war was not against the Jewish body, it was against the Jewish soul. So what better way to celebrate the Jewish soul is by lighting candles? Because Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, a flame represents soul. That was the Etzem Hanes. It wasn't just a war, it was a war over the soul. So we celebrate the soul. Now, most of us, if someone asks you, what do you know most about your life? You're going to say, you know about your body a lot more than your soul. You wake up in the morning, you will know whether your body is tired and whether you're hungry. very few people are going to feel that the neshama is hungry and tired or thirsty. Tzamlecha nafshi, yes, is a nice niggin, but the question is it comparable to when you're physically thirsty? Your body tells you you don't need to look in the Shulchan Aruch to know when you're hungry that you should eat. You need to look in the Shulchan Aruch to know what to do, what the Eibishter wants you to do. Why is that the case? The Lev Yitzchak Baditchever once said, in his classic style, he would turn to God in heaven, he said, "A kunz, God, you made a kunz, you made a trick. About Olam Haba, about the spiritual world, you put into books. And you gave the people Olam Hazeh as a reality to live through it. So what do you think is going to happen? If you did it reverse, you write about Olam Hazeh in the books, and all the nisyanis and all the challenges and the darkness of this world and the corruption, and let them live a Olam Haba Dika life, a spiritual life, you'll see how they'll behave. But that's the world in which we live. In the language of Chassidus, Elikus is chachus, and Elamus is bepshitis. You've heard this expression. Existence, the first thing you know is what you feel. You don't feel what God wants. You also don't feel another person's pain. You feel your own first. Everything starts with yourself. And then, if you're a sensitive person and you train yourself, then you start empathizing and saying, 1 second, I'm not the only person on earth. But you know, there are entire psychologies that explain that every human being is all he is. Every human being, every man and woman is just a selfish creature. There was one of the classic radical atheists. I don't know if you came here to hear me talk about atheists, but there is a radical atheist. His name is Richard Dawkins, scientist. And he wrote a book called The Selfish Gene. The very gene, the genetics of our being is selfish. So the prevalent theory today in the larger world is that it's me, me, me. Now, you may say you disagree with it, but most people live their lives that way. As a matter of fact, the Even Ezra and the other commentaries ask, the mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, how is it possible? Adam korav eitz latzmei. Avas atzmei, that's a rule. You care about yourself first. So how could it be ahavta l'recha kamocha? If it says v'ahavta l'recha, love your fellow, fine. But kamocha, like yourself, it goes against human nature. Do you love anyone like yourself? So the cynics teach, how do they interpret v'ahavta l'recha kamocha? I love him as much as he loves me. That means kamocha. Obviously, that's not the meaning of the pasuk. So how do we explain that? So you may recall Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who passed away last year. So he was the chief rabbi of the UK for a number of years. So I was friendly with him. So he told this story. I heard it from him personally, but I also heard it from him also in public. He told the story. When he was a university student in England, he was studying philosophy. He wanted to become a philosopher. Then part of his, the treatise, the doctorate that he had to write was to do research. So he came to America to interview different thinkers, including rabbis. So he went to different Jewish leaders in this New York or around the United States. And one of them was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says that instead of him interviewing the Rebbe ended up interviewing him, like what's going on campus and this. And anyway, the Rebbe convinced him, said, what are you going to do with a degree in philosophy? Who's it going to help? You should become a rabbi. So then you can use the philosophy and everything else you learn to help people. Anyway, he was persuaded and that's what happened. He became a rabbi and he gave always credit to the Rebbe for planting the seeds. He's not a Chabad chassid, but he respected the Rebbe's approach and so on. So what did he write in his doctorate? He wrote on the concept of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, which is that all Jews are responsible for one another. And he wrote an 80-page paper, which he finished, and then Rabbi Vogel, Fivers Vogel, who knew him, said, why don't you send it into the Rebbe? Since the Rebbe inspired you to become rabbi, he says the Rebbe's going to read it. He says the Rebbe will do what he wants to do, but At least he has the option. Send it in. The Rebbe wants to read it. He'll read it. He won't read it. So he did it. He sent it in. And he gets, to his surprise, a few days later, I'm not sure how long, the Rebbe sent it out and writes on the top page, he writes, Iker chosim in ha-sefer. The bottom line is missing. You don't refer to Tanya Perek Lamed Beis. Tanya Perek Lamed Beis, chapter 32, Lamed Beis, Lev, chapter on heart, or it can be pronounced love, is a chapter on Avos Yisrael, and Iker Chosim in ha-sefer. You don't even mention it. Now he says, he immediately was surprised why the Rebbe would say that. His paper was not Apich Sidis. He wrote a whole paper. Where do we learn Yisrael Revim Zeh B'Zeh? We learn it from the Teichacha and Parsha B'Chukesai, from a negative. He didn't even talk about the Primis HaTeira. So why was Iker Chosim in ha-sefer? He says he never understood it until he was asked to speak the Shloshim of the Rebbe after Gimel Tammuz. So then it suddenly came to him. And his talk was all around that. It orbited around this question. He said now he wants to repay a debt of from 1969 to 1994. How many years is that? It's good. How much? 69 to 94? Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard. Well, that's why we have actuaries in the company.
94 minus 69.
So what do we got? 25. Okay. The pundits say it's 25 years. Okay. So he says he wants to repay a debt now for 25 years and explain, he understands now why the Rebbe said it. Because the Rebbe was asking a question, basically. You wrote a whole paper, why Jews are responsible for one another. Why is Iker Chosim in ha-sefer? Because you don't explain why. Why are they responsible for another? And more importantly, how are they responsible for another? Since Adam Karav Eitzel Atzmai, since every person is first and foremost interested in self-interest, it's called self-interest. You know, Jews are big balei tzedakah, and some people literally give everything. But most people don't just give what there belongs to them. You know, we have bank accounts and retirement accounts and so on. I remember, just as an aside, to drive the point home, my father, Olav Hashalom, told me once, he says, when they came to arrest my grandfather in Moscow for counter-revolutionary activity, which meant spreading Judaism, so it was the middle of the night, and they arrested him. And when they arrested someone there was no due process. You know, basically you could consider the person dead. And he was a little boy. His mother was in her 20s. They had just been married a few years. So it was one of the tragedies among many. Ended up being my grandfather was not killed. But here's the interesting story. A chassid that lived in Moscow, his name was Yankov Zhurevitzer, or Yaakov Meskalnik. He came one night, a few nights after my grandfather was arrested, and he was not a family member. He was just a chassid that lived in Moscow. And he knocked on the door when it was like late, when no one was watching, because they were always following you. It's always a sakana, danger. And he brought in a bundle of what they called tsenelech, hundreds and hundreds of rubles, the equivalent of thousands and thousands of dollars. He put it on the table. He said, "You're going to need it. You're now either a widow or almost." We didn't know what the status was. So here it is. My father was a little boy, and he saw this, and that was it. So I said to my father, "Was that common? That a guy just came in, just dropped thousands of dollars without even asking, and just came?" So I remember my father said it almost with like he was shocked at my question. He said, "What do you think was going on in Russia? You think there were bank accounts? You think people were accumulating interest? We were all in it together. We either died together or we lived together. Everybody was like one family. There was no such thing as mine and yours." Now, I never thought of it that way because we live in America. I said, "So what happened when everybody came to this country?" He says, "It changed. Now we have bank accounts. Everybody's got theirs. So people are generous, But it's still yours and mine is mine. Shali, shali, shalach, shalach. It was the first time I was exposed that there was even the way people thought that way. Where are they going? You're in the middle of a Holocaust in a concentration camp. You're not exactly saving up for the future. You're barely trying to make it. Now, there were people, unfortunately, that behaved in atrocious ways and were still selfish. But many were simply, it was simple. My grandmother needed the money. He had some money, so he brought it to her, and that was it. It wasn't even without fanfare, and he didn't get any awards, and there were no galas and no dinners and no crowdfunding campaigns either, with all respect to we live in a comfortable world with all the challenges. So the Rebbe was saying back to Rabbi Sachs, what he was writing was, yeah, you write a whole paper of 80, 90 pages, but how is it possible? How is it possible that a human being who's driven by self-interest, me, can easily just become Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, responsible for one another, and therefore, Iker Chosm Nasefer, because without Tanya, chapter 32, you never find an answer for this question. What's the answer? The answer is because we're not bodies. If we were just physical bodies, so every one of you is sitting in your chair. If you want me to get into your chair, you're going to have to get up. That's the rules of time and space in this world. That everything occupies its time and space, and that's that. But we're not just bodies. We have souls. And the shamas don't occupy time and space. You can have two people sitting in different spaces, but they can be one because they love each other. You can be sitting there, someone an inch away, and hate that person, God forbid. You could be a million miles away from somebody that you love, and you're like one, because neshamas transcend time and space. Says the Alter Rebbe, the foundation of real love, Ava, is nafshe ikar v'gufei tofel. The soul is more important than the body. That needs work, but at least there's now a formula. So become more soulful. The more soulful you are, the less gashmis, the less physicality will make a difference. Explain this phenomenon. I read somewhere that around 2 years ago, there was a guy on the Lower East Side that everyone thought was a homeless pauper, no family, no children, no nothing. Anyway, he died, like 89 or something like that. And they discovered that he's worth $2.5 billion. Billion. Now, he never gave a penny to tzedakah. He didn't even spend, there are two types of stingy people. They're stingy only with others, but not with themselves. And there are people stingy with themselves. Whatever that phenomenon is. Anyway, where do they think all the money went? To the government. There are no heirs. But he held on to it. So I was thinking I was going to write a whole article. I just ran out of time. Why is it this phenomenon? Nobody has figured out in Tafshin Pei Beis Shana in 5,782 years how to take your money with you to the next world. Nobody, with all that technology, they haven't figured that out. And yet people will be lohot. They'll run after money to the last second of their lives, though they can't take it with them. What is this hold of Gashmis on us? So unless you learn Chassidus, you really can't understand it, because it sounds actually absurd. When the Gemara says that people will prefer Chaya Shah over Chaya Elam, what does that mean? I'd prefer temporary life over eternal life. Someone say to you right now, this has been tested in many studies. Here's $1 million right now, or we'll give you $100 million over 10 years. People will choose the million. People want now, instant gratification. It's the classic rule of Elam Hazeh, that we don't value eternity. Yeah, in concept we do. In some ways, people want to prepare Elam Haba, but the fact is, the physical world has a hold on us that is no different than hypnosis mamish. Now, all of you look like tzaddikim to me, but did you ever get caught up in the throes of a taiva? You know what a taiva is? A real lust, desire. Especially in the area of hipachatznius. Let's put it in Lashon Nekiah. Even at the moment that you're caught up in it, you know it's not going to be forever. But you become literally obsessed, consumed. You could say, what do I need a ruach shtus for? I have a taiva. Because if you knew the consequences, would any normal person put their hand in fire? No. If you put your hand in fire, it means either you don't know that it's fire, or you don't know that fire burns you. No normal person would. There's a halacha, there's a din. If you're a shomer, someone gives you the animal to watch, a behemoth. So because you took upon yourself the responsibility to protect the animal, so you're supposed to make sure the animal doesn't destroy anything and doesn't get hurt. What happens if the animal jumps into a fire? So there's a shach that talks about it. You're not responsible. Why? Because a normal animal doesn't jump into fire. It had to be a behemoth shait. Something's wrong with this animal. If the owner didn't tell you it's a crazy animal, you're liable for normal liabilities, like trampling on someone's property or normal things, but not the meshuggah behemoth that jumps into fire. So being that we don't see it, so it means it's a ruach shtus, it's a moment of insanity. The only thing is you can't claim insanity for Avedas because you have pechira. It's not real insanity. But it's a moment of when you get caught up, and you see this all the time. Intelligent people get caught doing things that destroy their career. And you say, what was the matter with them? What did they think? They tweeted, all the different scandals. Because when you get caught, this material world has such a hold on us, you're completely blinded. And in case you need proof, just the next time you have a taiva that really consumes you, there you have it. You don't need any you don't need kra lomali svarihi. So the Rebbe was saying that without Tanya Perek Lamed Beis, without understanding that nefesh is ikar, no way that you're going to free yourself from the physical power of selfishness and greed that this world presents. That's what Rabbi Sachs said. So the story I wanted to tell, this is already a story, but you get two stories for the price of one, okay? The story I wanted to tell was how this impacted me in a very particular way a number of years ago. This was, I think I told the story, Yutaskisla, maybe not, whatever. If you heard it, you heard it. If you didn't, you'll hear it now. So I was invited to speak on a panel. It was in Huntington, New York. That's in Long Island. And Torah Law School has a school there. So in the auditorium, they had a panel, myself, and an Orthodox rabbi, and a conservative rabbi. And you'll see from the story why I don't call myself a rabbi and definitely not an Orthodox rabbi. So the panel discussion was about the fundamental principles of Jewish faith, especially Mashiach. Okay. Now the truth is, I wasn't told it's a panel. In principle, I stay away from panels. I've been on panels, but the reason is because a panel, especially with different types of people of different theories, can be very confusing for the audience. Because what do? If you say something and another person on the panel says something you totally disagree with, you don't want to get into a fight. Start disagreeing in public. On the other hand, if you don't say anything, it sounds like you agree. So it can be complicated. But here, too late. They already invited them all, and I couldn't pull out. So here we have a panel discussion on Mashiach. But I told the host, I said, just to keep it a little, because if not, it can become a complete free-for-all. It'll be a mess. This one says, I don't believe in Mashiach. This one says, I do believe. That's not, if you have a big audience or any audience, it's just going to be confusing. So I suggested, why don't we prepare 10 questions that all the panelists will see beforehand, and that way you create control. Like, instead of saying, do you believe in Mashiach? Why is Mashiach a fundamental principle? So at least we all agree on that, and then each one explains it, and it actually worked out very well. Fine. Then what happened next was this. After the questions were asked, then came the turn for the audience to ask questions. Now, it was a big auditorium. There was over 500 people there. It was packed. And a woman gets up in the back somewhere, and she asked the following question. And this is what we call a definitive moment, at least for me. Something that happened here that doesn't happen every day. The woman, very articulate, she says, I speak on behalf of the largest segment of the Jewish population today. And that segment is called the unaffiliated Jew. Jews that don't necessarily go to synagogue, don't even know what it means to be Jewish, maybe anti-Semitism a little, pro-Israel, but don't really affiliate, which is correct. Most Jews are not affiliated. So I speak on behalf of this segment. I'd like to know, from all three rabbis, you also eloquently presented the idea of Messiah, Mashiach, Geula. What will happen to us millions of unaffiliated Jews if Mashiach comes tonight? What will happen with us tomorrow morning? That was her question. Now, I remember immediately thinking, oh boy, this is a good question. I've heard a lot of questions. This is going to be very interesting, what happens next. Because you can't really, this is... And ask rabbis this question. Ask anyone you want, and you'll know a lot about them. Anyway, thank God my turn was last, so I was the third to answer. So first came the Orthodox rabbi. Since there's no names, there's no Lashon Hara, it's okay. And he said 4 words, and you'll hear the response he got. The 4 words he said in responding, what will happen to these Jews? He said, God will have mercy. God will have mercy. Now, I don't know if you ever heard 500 people boo somebody. Boo is it's like a niggin almost. It's synchronized. A lot of people booing sounds like a big echo. The whole place booed him. And it was very embarrassing, obviously, because everyone clearly, first of all, he didn't answer the question. Second of all, what he said was pretty condescending, like as if, God will have mercy that he won't murder them all or murder half of them. I mean, that was what it implied. So he didn't help much. He didn't answer the question. So it only created more aggravation, to be honest. Then came the conservative rabbi. And here's what he did. He turned to me. We were all 3 of us sitting on a podium. He turned to me and he said, Rabbi Jacobson, I have the same question myself. What will happen to them? That's what he asked. Yeah. And then he talked about pouring oil on the fire. He said, and his voice was dripping with cynicism. And he said the following. I'm not going to quote who he mentioned, but he mentioned someone by name, a Gadol B'Yisrael from the previous generation. He says, I heard from the name of this and this great Jewish leader that the Holocaust happened because the Jews were sinners. And the sins were in Europe, especially in Germany and France and Central Europe. And that's why God sent the Nazis. And then he went into graphic detail, which is very hard for me to even to repeat, of how every atrocity perpetrated by the Nazis on the Jews was a midah keneged midah, tit for tat, for something the Jews had done wrong. Why their heads were shaved, shaitels, children killed. As I said, I don't want to repeat it. It's the worst imagination. The place was mortified. Mamish, I remember it was like the air was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. And it was so disturbing. And here goes, now my turn. 2 official rabbis who not only didn't answer the question, they made it much worse. And now here I am to get up to say what I have to say. I'll tell you the truth, I had no clue what I was going to say. But in times like this, what you do is you invoke schus over, you invoke all the merits you have. And I said to myself, I was thinking quickly, I had to think very quickly, because it was like no time. And I knew this was going to be a major Kiddush Hashem or major Chil Hashem, literally. Because if I answer like they do, or inadequately, 500 people are going to go away. Okay, here's what rabbis have to say. Great, beautiful. So I remember thinking to myself, what would the Baal Shem Tov say? What would the Barditchever say? What would Moshe Rabbeinu Ohev Yisrael say when he went to defend the Jews, even with the Chet HaEgel? What would the Rebbe say? That's what I was thinking. And I'll tell you what I said, and I didn't, they both spoke short. I went for it. I was going to take as much time as I needed. And I really, again, felt the stakes were really high. So this is not some cute answer I came up with. This is what I was trained. I felt like, sometimes you train half your life to go to war once. Maybe everything I've learned was for this moment. So I said, the Bala Tanya Vashulchan Aruch Rab Shneur Zalman of Liadi, as I said, I evoked all the names with all the titles, said once that if you have a question and you don't have an answer, you tell a story. And if that doesn't work, you sing a song. So I'm going to tell a story, and hopefully it answers the question. If not, I'll have to sing. Okay, so I had a nice laugh. Everyone laughed. Very good. It would have been nice. I could just say good night and leave. That would have been good, but I knew that I'm not getting off the hook so fast. And then I told a story. Story with the Rebbe Rashab, 5th Chabad Rebbe, Rab Shalom Dev Ber of Lubavitch, famous Rebbe, who once on a Simchas Torah, Tofresh Mem Ches, the equivalent is 1887. And he was speaking, he said a Maimer Chassidus called Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba Betrunya Im Briesov. That God cannot come to a complaint with his people because he created them flawed. So he explained the Maila, the quality of Anoshim Pshutim, simple Jews who don't have Torah, who don't have Aveda. They're people who they're not scholars, they're not pious, they don't have any special great Jewish qualities, so to speak. They're simple Jews. They do what they're told, and they're not the whole. And he spoke in very high terms, very glowing terms of these simple Jews. Pshutim, Poshatim. After Simchas Torah, one of his big chassidim, his name was Moshe Mendelssohn, who was a big chassid, a Lamdan, a Yerushalayim, a real, said to the Rebbe, he approached the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, you always welcome questions. We understand the Maila of Anoshim Pshutim at Ad Kedei Kach, to that extent that they're greater than anything. So the Rebbe said to him, Rav Moshe, I know that you, for Parnasa, you deal with diamonds. He dealt with precious stones, diamonds. If you don't mind, I'd like you to bring to me a batch of stones of different values, and I want to pick out which is the most valuable one. Moshe didn't understand why the Rebbe wants it. Okay, the Rebbe is asking for it, for sure. He brings a few stones, he puts them out in front of the Rebbe. The Rebbe chooses the largest stone and says, is this the most valuable one, the most expensive one? He didn't want to contradict the Rebbe, say, it's a good day. He tried to get out of it. No, the Rebbe is insisting. Okay. He says, no, Rebbe, it's not. But it looks so lustrous and so large. Why is it not the most precious stone? He says, Rebbe, with all respect, you have to have a trained eye. I don't know if he said the 4 C's, the carat, color, cut, etc. But he said you have to have a trained eye. It's not what it looks like to the naked eye. A stone has other elements that you need to appreciate. So the Rebbe said to him, if that's the case with inanimate doimim, stones, how much more so with neshamas? You have to be a trained eye. What are you talking to me about neshamas? As if you're some expert. Pshutim, not pshutim. How do you know what a neshama is? So I told the story in this detail, and then I said, does anyone know the mystery of the journey of a neshama, of a soul to this world? Why is it that some souls God sends into a home that's a beautiful home, a home that has all the privileges, money, they give their child a good education, a good Jewish education, a healthy home, a functional home, and all positive, all beautiful things. And then another soul, God decided that he's going to dump into another home. That's a dysfunctional, abusive home, no education, no Jewish education. The child has to fight for everything. Why did this soul end up here and this soul end up here? Who decided this exactly? This is God's mysterious ways. What do we know? What do we know about souls and where they end up? Why we even think that we're experts on souls? And then I continued, and I said, the Alter Rebbe, again, the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman, said another thing. On the pasuk, on the verse that says, "Moshe ya'onov b'kol adam asher al pnei adama," that Moses was the humblest man that ever walked on earth. So the Alter Rebbe says something very fascinating. In a Maimer in Tovkuf Samach Beis, he says, Moshe was shown all the generations till the end of time. It says, Ad Yama Achrin, so the Medrash says, Ad Yema Achrin. He saw till the end of time, till Mashiach would come. And when Moshe saw the generation, in the last generation of Ikvus and the Mashiach, the souls of our time, for that he was Onov Mikol Adam, for that he was humble. Why? Because his generation was a day. It was an evolved, enlightened generation. They had all the gifts, all the blessings. Yitzis Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, Matan Torah, all the miracles. They were a very high level. And still they were far from perfect. They built Egel Azov, the golden calf, etc. But here's a generation, they see no miracles. It's a cheshach kafel mechupel, dark golus. There's no miracles. None of the Giluyim that time of the Beis Hamikdash or earlier. And still there's a Jew trying to go to a shul on Yom Kippur, or making this attempt, that attempt. That Moshe Rabbeinu, that was what humbled him, of all things. So here's what I concluded. I said to the audience, I said, so I was trained and taught by my teachers that if Mashiach comes tonight, the Jews with the greatest challenges, the ones that were put into homes and families that didn't know anything, will be the ones that march first. And by tomorrow morning, every Jew will appreciate and know that the best way to actualize as a human being and as a Jew is through Torah mitzvahs. That's what I was taught. Now I have to share with you what happened after this, even though this could be a little self-serving, but so be it, right? What happened next was I got a standing ovation from all the people there. Now the two rabbis, or whatever you want to call them, they were quite humiliated, which was perfectly fine with me, because they deserved it, because they really had not. But I also had Rachmanis on them, because who taught them? What did they know? I didn't get this answer myself. I got this because I grew up in a home and a family and environment where this was inculcated from before I can even remember. This was a basic thing. If anyone was sitting at a Shabbos table, there was no us and them. You know, many people grew up in a frum hole. You know, they do a big favor. We'll invite someone that's a secular Jew to my table, and they're like, we'll give you a benevolence. I'm having a demonstration that I, the superior one, is welcoming you into my home. This was not even conceivable in the environment I grew up in. Who knows which neshamas are greater? Right now in this room, can anyone tell me who's the greatest neshama after the rabbi and Shlomo, which is a joke, of course, but I just want to give them some respect. How do you know which neshama is greatest? Is the guy with the longest beard? The guy that is most mahadir in mitzvah? No. Maybe it's the person with the greatest challenges. The Eibishter took that neshama to the darkest place, like I said before about Chanukah, because that neshama has the power to overcome darkness. And maybe a neshama that's put into the light doesn't have such power, if you really want to start analyzing. And we're not. And secondly, we're not here to analyze. No one made us a judge, b'chlal. You know, we humbly receive whatever the gifts we have, thank God, and you do your best. So this was what I ate and drank. This was my life. I breathed this approach. It wasn't something, like I said, I came up with a nice idea that night. It was based on Tanya. The Tanya is not just a theory. That neshama is ikar. Once a neshama is ikar and guf tofel, you have no miyudei gdulasan umalasan. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Who knows who's greatest? Both gdulasan and malasan. Whose qualities? Who knows? It's not even given to us the right to even try to know. Even basic things, al todin es chaveri ad shetagilim came. You don't even know what he's going through, let alone what kind of neshama the person has. The final end of the story I want to say is this. The woman came over to me, the one who asked the question. She said only one thing to me, and that was it. She says, you don't know what you did tonight for me. You don't know what you accomplished. And that was it. I understood out of respect. I wasn't going to ask her. She wants to share, she could share. I never saw her again, to be honest. I'm always looking out, maybe I'll meet her somewhere. Just to see what happened. Because I don't really know who it was. I have no idea. And it's not my business. The Eibishter wants me to meet her, and we'll meet, and we'll talk. I will find out. It'll be interesting to see. But I have no idea what it was. Everybody has their story. But this, if you want to talk on Neshama, Chanukah is celebration of Ner Hashem Yishmas Adam. These are the stories, just some that capture it. And it's not just theory here. This comes down to your whole attitude to life. What do you do when your child comes home from school and they're not behaving the way you expected them to behave? So if you look at them as a goof, as a body, okay, you don't fit into my club. I'll punish you, or I'll whatever it is. I love you, but I'm not going to accept this. But if you see them as a neshama of Hashem, even your own child, you don't have a right to judge. It's not your neshama. God sent that neshama to the child. Here I could tell the name of the person because he says it publicly. Maybe I shouldn't say the name. I don't know. There's a shliach, a Chabad shliach, lives in London, and he wrote to the Rebbe that he has rage problems. He's anger. He gets angry at his children and he hits them, and he cannot control himself. You want me to give the initials backwards? No. No, he says it publicly. That's why, but I don't know if I want to be. So he wrote to the Rebbe, what should he do? So the Rebbe wrote back to him, and he tells the story publicly. He says, the Rebbe says to him, next time you're ready, even thinking about picking up your hand, who are you hitting? The Eibishter is a kind. The Eibishter is a kind. This is the God's child. It's not your child. You're the biological parent. You have the schuz, the Eibishter send the neshama to your family. You're touching God's child. Now, I'm not sure if it helped or not. I hope it did. But it's strong words. So we can all apply this guaranteed anywhere in life. The judgmentalism that exists, especially the more frum you are, the more judgmental you are. That's what I'm told by frum Jews, Some of my best friends are frum Jews. So the fact of the matter is, judgmentalism is b'chlal not. Where exactly in the Torah says to be judgmental? There's only one shefet kol haaretz. Yeah, if you're sitting in a bezdin, you have certain obligations. But even then, what does it say? V'shaftu ha'eda, v'hitzilu ha'eda. Even the sheftim were meant to be hitzilu. They're not there to judge. They're there to save. You have to follow the halachas. The din, imagine that din, the Rambam, the halacha, that if a bezdin of Ayin Aleph, of a Sanhedrin of Ayin Aleph, right, and somebody is accused of murder, and there's unanimous decision that the person is guilty, what's the din? He's acquitted. Can you imagine? Unanimous. 71, all agree the person is guilty. It can't get more guilty than that. The Torah says he's acquitted. Because that not one person could find a limud schus, something's wrong. And if they put someone to death, the bezdin is considered a Sanhedrin katlonis, murderers. We're not talking about corrupt bezdin. We're talking about legitimate one. Why would the Torah say such a thing? Because you have to find every possible way to save souls, not to kill souls. So the point is, if you really want to take Chanukah, drive the point home, is the ultimate celebration of neshamas. Neshama ikir v'gufei tofel. And it's not, like they say, I don't know who coined this line, it's not that we're physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. This is the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit. That first came on Neshama, then it came into a guf. However, by us, guf is ikir. Like I said, a likus is ilam is bepshitis and a likus b'schachis. The reality of our lives is materialism. Let's be honest, that's what it is. And it takes a lot of work to see the other way around, to see that the spiritual is more powerful than the physical. So Chanukah is exactly that, the celebration, not of the guf, that was Purim, that's Purim. Chanukah is celebration of the neshama. And that's why Neiris, a flame, is the closest thing that the physical eye can see that looks like a neshama. Neir Hashem nishmas Adam, it defies gravity. It's the only physical thing that goes up, not down. Like a neshama that rises, is always seeking Yelcha Mechayel al Chayel. Higher and higher and higher. So there's so many lessons that we can learn from this idea of celebration of neshama. And I know some people say, well, I never heard of Chanukah presented quite this way. It sounds like New Age stuff. It's not New Age at all. This is, if you think about it, just go back to the Gemara. I didn't say anything here that's a chiddush, to be honest. It's just we don't think of it in a shamadika ways. We think of it, an event happened back then. We remember it. We light the candles. We eat latkes, Chanukah gelt, a few other beautiful things. But if you personalize it, adarabah. There's other lessons as well. I'm just giving one of many. But that's the whole point of Yiddishkeit, is personalizing it, making it yours. I once saw, I haven't found it in a sefer, but I once saw in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, where he asked the question, why do we say every day, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avosenu Elokei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov? The chronological order, historically, is the other way around. First it was Elokei Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, then it's Elokei Avosenu, then Elokeinu. So the order should have been reversed. And he teaches like this. He says, because in chinuch, when you grow up, the first thing your parents tell you is Elokei Avosenu. You serve the God of your parents, because they're the first ones that educate you about Elokei, the Eibishter. But when you grow into an adult, it's first supposed to be Elokeinu. Are you worshiping someone else's God or your God? Do you own it? Have you personalized it? Are you internalized it? Or are you worshiping, oh, my parents did it, I also do it. That's why it starts with Elokeinu. First is your God. That Elokeinu happens to also be the God of your parents. Same Eibishter. And then it's Elokei Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov. They were the first in historical order. But in personal order, first has to be something that you can say, I own this. This is mine. And that is not an easy task, but that is the real challenge of our time. If we were able to master the formula of this, trust me, most of our problems with children, with ourselves, with others would disappear. So it's a big task, but it's doable. And that's ultimately the word that when you understand what a neshama is, and that's really what Chanukah is about, everything changes, the whole picture changes. L'chaim, l'chaim, everyone should be blessed to have only nachas from children and family. And may we use this special day where you have 8 flames. So it's the whole full array, the full onslaught of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Should only bring barachas, begashmis and beruchnias. And we have to do our part, because remember, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. L'chaim. I think I told the story you just listened. Okay, so. up, huh? Just warming up. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Hey. Many faces I recognize. I'm a cousin here. Yeah, he lives here. So, not to leave any strings untied here, I've been asked before the question why it's called Zot Chanukah. So, Al Pi Hanal Yuvan. Okay? According to what we spoke about, the answer is the word Zos is when you point at something, you see it with your own eyes. Like when you say Zeh versus Koi or Hu. It's not in the third person. Zeh means you're pointing Marabetz Boy V'Emer Zeh. That's the expression in Chazal. Chanukah is the celebration of neshamas. Ner Hashem nishmas Adam, ner mitzvah v'torah. That's why we light a flame. It's not just a flame because it happened to emanate a menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. It's the other way around. Why was there a menorah in the first place? Because the menorah, Hashem wanted something in the temple, in the Mishkan, that represents a neshama. So that's why he said, you have a menorah, it has 7 branches. They represent 7 different categories of souls. So it's the other way around. First there were neshamas, then came a menorah. Not the other way around. So Chanukah is about celebrating that. Since the fact is, what is Zos by us in our lives? When you point at something, what do you point at? We all point at physical things. We don't point at spiritual things. You can't see a spiritual thing. It's invisible. But Chanukah is meant to make us want to see and experience in a tangible way, in a concrete way, something which is usually not seen. So therefore, Zos Chanukah means that this is the day where you can actually see Zos, what a neshama looks like. That's the goal of the Zos Chanukah, that it should be revealed to us. Now you'll say, 1 second, but we're not spiritual beings, we're physical. How can we see spiritual? Well, when you treat someone in a spiritual way, when you treat them in a loving way, then you see them in a loving way. You know, the famous story of the Rashbi, of the husband who wanted to divorce his wife. It's a long story in the Medrash. So the Rashbi gave him an eitzah and said, first treat your wife like a queen for 6 months, and then we'll talk about divorce. So the long story short is that that's what he did, and after treating her like a queen for 6 months, he didn't want to divorce her anymore. Because when you treat someone in a loving way, you begin to love them. You know, the Rebbe Rashab I mentioned, the Razah, were playing as children once. You know, the children play what they see by their parents. So they played Rebbe Chassid. So one of the stories is that the Rebbe Rashab played the Rebbe, the Razah played the Chassid. He came in to him as if he was like, they were both children. And he says to the Rebbe Rashab, what is a Jew? What is Aid? So the Rebbe Rashab said, Aid is fire. Is fire. Like Chanukah fire. So the Rebbe Razah touched the hand of the Rebbe Rashab, his brother, his younger brother, and said, Aid is fire, if a Jew is fire, why don't I get burned by touching you? So the Rebbe Rashab answered as a child, because when fire touches fire, it doesn't get burned. It's when a physical thing touches fire, it gets burned. Fire doesn't burn fire. Just like water doesn't get wet, fire doesn't get burned. So even if we don't see always the neshama in someone, but if you treat them like they're a neshama, that's like seeing it. Then it brings it out in the open. This explains, when you look at the Shita of Chabad, the Rebbe, where he educated a whole generation, that wherever you go, whoever you meet, no matter who it is, no matter what they look like, you have to talk to them like you're talking to a soul, to a neshama. On the outside, may not look like that. They may not be that soulful and not spiritual and not that Jewish behaving or God-fearing. But you have to treat them like they're a neshama, and then that brings out the neshama in them. In the Zohar it says that when the students wanted to hear a Torah from the Rashbi, you know what they did? They gave him compliments. They called him all kinds of compliments. So the question is, what do you mean? Why would you compliment someone? Rashbi was a nosimana ba'alma. He was a person of total bittul, total humility. Because when you bring out, you tell someone that they have a quality, it brings out the quality in them. I mean, it's a tremendous lesson in motivation in general. If you have people working for you, or even your children, if you describe to them the quality they have, even if they right now are not doing it, it makes them want to live up to it. So we're not talking about creating, fabricating something. It's showing, it's accentuating, it's emphasizing the positives. This means looking at everyone through the eyes of a neshama, as if you were talking to your own neshama. So Zot Chanukah is telling us that's the point. Those of you that learn a little Kabbalah, Chassidus, there's a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe quotes it quite often. It's called Baruch She'asa Nisim Lavasenu Bayomim Ahem Bizman Hazeh, Chanukah mimer. And it's actually from the Alter Rebbe that he said in Tov Kuf Samach. But the Tzemach Tzedek elaborates on it. And it's interesting, if you look in Sefer HaMenhagim Chabad, on Chanukah, it says Zot Chanukah. So look in the footnote, he says, look in this mimer if you want to understand what Zot Chanukah is. So this is one of the places, the rare places in Chassidus that explains Zot Chanukah, Api Kabbalah Chassidus. And he explains it in two opposite ways. So I'll try to say first how it's in the original and then make it relevant. So he says Zot Chanukah is the 8th day of the holiday, the last day. So the last is usually means after 7 days comes the next. The question is, which level in the spheres? We know there are 7 spheres, the 7 emotions. So which level is Zot Chanukah? Is it the end of the spheres or is it above them? So he says 2 interpretations. One is it's Malchus, that follows the 7 days before, that come from Atik Yamin, higher 7 days. The other is the opposite. It goes from the bottom up. That it's referring to what's called in Chassidus and Kabbalah Atik. So Zot Chanukah is the highest sphere, not the lowest one. So seemingly 2 different explanations. Is it coming after that which came before it, or is it going higher to the highest levels? So the Rebbe explains in a very powerful Farbrengen. It was Shabbos Pashas Miketz Tavshin Yud Gimel. It was Zot Chanukah. So the Rebbe explains there that how do you reconcile these two? He says because when you want to bring it down very low, you have to go up very high. That's the bottom line. But let me explain it in simple English. You know the concept of number 7 always reflects the structure of something, a cycle. 7 days of the week, 7 years of the sabbatical, Shemitah this year. So you have 7 days of the week. The Rashba says that 8, the number 8, always symbolizes something that is beyond the structure. What's called in English transcendent level. It's beyond the structure. And it's what's called Shemer Esahekev. It protects the structure. What it means in simple English is this: 7 days of the week, even Shabbos, is this still part of Ishtalshlus, still part of the structure. Number 8 represents a level like, let's say you're looking at a painting or a beautiful natural sight, wonder, and you stand in awe of it. Awe is like a makif. It's not a pnimi. It's not the 7. It's something beyond it. It's more than the sum of the parts. So in anything in life, you have the building, the structure of the building, all the parts, but then you have something that rises above it, that hovers above it, that connects it all together. It's like the vision. So Zot Chanukah is number 8. It refers to a higher level. The question is it coming after the 7 or is it higher than the 7? What it does is allows us to experience the Chanukah experience, not just within the structure, but also beyond the structure. So just to give an example, like, generally speaking, the avodah of a person's work is always structured. Every day, you daven 3 times a day. You have the different mitzvahs you do. Everything has its order. Come Simchas Torah, we dance. We dance without limits. That's like Shemer Esahekev. That's why Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, is the 8th day. The 7 days of Sukkot is still within a structure. The 8th day, you go out of limitations. Now, you can't get to 8 without 7. You can't have Simchas Torah every day of the year. Once you have the 7, then you can go to a place that's completely beyond. Just to drive it home, it was in the year 1977 when the Rebbe had a heart attack on Shmini Atzeres. Shmini, 8th day. Because of the heart attack, the Rebbe could not farbring that Simchas Torah. And usually at the end of the Yom Tov, the Rebbe would wash and long farbringen and then bench and make Havdalah and admire of Havdalah, and then he would give kosher bracha. He'd pour everyone a blessed wine. Because it was the heart attack, he couldn't do it. However, came Chanukah, the Rebbe called in on the day before Zeis Chanukah, like yesterday, the Rebbe, or like today that year, he called in Rabbi Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht, and told him secretly, I want to keep this a secret, that because today is the 8th day of Chanukah, tonight will be the 8th day of Chanukah, so I want to be mashlim, I want to complete what I missed, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. I'm going to wash, I'll be a farbringen, I'll wash, which the Rebbe never did on Chanukah, and then I'll give out kosher bracha to complement, to fill what was not done, because it says in Sfarim that the 8 days, the 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres correspond to the 7th and 8th day of Chanukah. So he told Rabbi Hecht to keep it a secret. So Rabbi Hecht asked the Rebbe, can he tell one person? So the Rebbe said, who do you want to tell? He says, I want to tell my brother, Avram. I can tell one person. So you can imagine what that meant. One person told another one person, another, and then everyone knew about it by the time. I mean, they had to buy challah. It was a process. The Rebbe was going to wash. So it wasn't a big secret. Why the Rebbe said secret, who knows? I mean, the Rebbe knew that there'll be more than one person at the farbringen. But I guess some things, maybe mayim genuvim yim taku, you appreciate it more when it's a secret, you know. This was a very extraordinary farbringen because everyone knew the Rebbe was never going to remain a bal chayv, meaning indebted, that if something he wants to do, he will ultimately find a way to do it. So everyone saw that Zeis Chanukah as being like the Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah of that earlier that year, when the Rebbe did not dance, at least in a revealed way, right? Yeah. It was like a Suda Seidah, in addition to fulfilling, which means like a thank you Suda. The Rebbe spoke a lot about Zeis Chanukah, about the 8th, he compared it to the 8th day of Shmini Atzeres. So number 8 is not regular. That's why the bris milah is on 8th day. Whenever you find 8th always represents something that's higher than the regular structure. Now, I want to share something which, I don't know if you ever heard this before, but it's quite powerful. Rabbi Avram Hecht, the brother of, when he heard about this farbringen coming, he wrote to the Rebbe a note. And he asked the Rebbe a question. He said, since the Rebbe came back now stronger than ever, and the Rebbe did come back stronger than ever, I can tell you that literally farbringens almost doubled in size after the heart attack. Literally farbringen. If you look at the Rebbe's Sichos, till 1978, 2 volumes, 3 volumes. After 1981, 82, 4 volumes, 5 volumes. So the Rebbe doubled his output. I'm not talking about a young man here. So he asked the Rebbe, since the Rebbe came back stronger than ever and healthier, why did we have to have this agmas nefesh? Why did we have to have this aggravation in the first place? That's what he asked the Rebbe. You know, so the Rebbe wrote to him, Re'ei Zoyar b'hagdama. He told him to look at the Zoyar in the introduction to the Zoyar. Now, when you look at this introduction, it's quite wild, I have to tell you. It's very wild, actually. In the introduction to Zohar is a long story. It goes pages, maybe 5, 6 pages in Aramaic. But the gist and the Nekuda is that Rab Chia went up to heaven and he was shown, because of his chusim, that he had kochsech and Mashiach. That's what it says. He was very much involved in Mashiach inyanim. So he was shown all the heichalas, all the departments, so to speak, all the chambers. I say heichalas, the chambers, the hallways. and including the chamber of Mashiach and also the chamber of Rashbi. And Rashbi asked, who is this man that knows all these secrets of Mashiach and so on? And they told him. So he said, then maybe he belongs here. Maybe he shouldn't go back down below. That's what it says there. But then another Tana came and said, no, we still need him down below to do his Aveda, to his work. So they agreed to let him come back to earth. That's what basically it says in this. It's a much longer arichas. Do you hear this? You ever heard this before? Unbelievable. You heard this? In other words, the Rebbe was saying, he's saying to the Zohar, that there was a Havamina, that the Rebbe, because of his greatness, Rashbi and the great people, the Shamas up in heaven, wanted the Rebbe with them. What do they need them down here? But then the Rebbe was given a so-called a second lease on life, and he was sent back below to finish the work he has to do. That's what the Rebbe wrote to Avram Hecht. It's all part of the Zot Chanukah so-called narrative. But from among the different things the Rebbe said then, which also is connected to other times the Rebbe spoke about Zot Chanukah, is that it says in Sfarim, Polish Sfarim, that's what the Rebbe said. I think in Bnei Yisachar or Bnei Yisachar, he says that Chanukah is a time, especially Zot Chanukah, for Pekid Akoris. That's a time, special auspicious time for people who have difficulty bearing children, that the Eibishter opens up the channels for children. In Tovshi Yud Gimel, in the Farbrengen I mentioned before, so the Rebbe said then, when he said it, he turned to people in the Farbrengen and told them to say L'chaim. So I heard the Rebbe turned to all the people that were having difficulty having children. So similar like Ba'imr is also says Pekad HaKoras Rashbi. But interesting, why Zot Chanukah? So the Rebbe explains there, because it's Amshacha from Shemer Sahekef. It's Yud Gimel Midas HaRachamim, the 8th level. In other words, even if the brachas that you usually would get are not enough to get you to have children, the 8th day reaches a whole other level, Keser. That's higher than the regular structure. Now, just to connect things, I saw once in another Farbrengen, like Ba'imr Tov Shemem, the Rebbe says the idea of Pekad HaKoros is not just physical. Obviously, it's a blessing for those that need children to have healthy children, and God should bless anyone that needs that. But the Rebbe says it also means that if a parent has challenges with his children, this day opens up channels that you usually don't get between parent and children. Yeah. That's an unbelievable word. Okay. So you have your work cut out for you, right? You're looking forward? Okay, that's good. That's the main thing. And so Zot Chanukah is a day that opens up channels. So the Eibishter should open up channels for brachas to everybody. Bona Chayim Ezena Revicha, those that need bracha for children, healthy children, both here and those wherever you may be. And of course, Parnosim Ezena, Barchava, Mafloga, Shirus Mafloga, Begashmis and Beruchnis, and Bona Chaya, and life and health, all in good health and all in long life, but Revicha with expansiveness. So we have a day today, Zot Chanukah, we have the Rebbe's brachas, we have the brachas from all the Sfarim, what kind of power this day has, and the day is young, it just started tonight. We have a whole Zot Chanukah. And if you may recall, the Rebbe also says Zot Chanukah is nimshach to the 9th day as well. So it's Apul and Nimshachas, even though we don't light a flame, but the Rebbe insisted that the flames of Zot Chanukah should continue burning even after Chanukah ends tomorrow night. So it's Apul and Nimshachas. Everyone should be gebenched. It should be a very blessed year, and finally a year of the real light, and that's the Geula Amitis Vashlein L'chaim L'chaim. We'll see. So do you all know the story behind Haner Salalu? You know the story? I'm looking for a story that Shlomo has not heard. Then it'll be worth your while, right? Haner Salol, the Chabad Haner Salol is a long song, right? The way I heard it, and maybe we'll sing the whole thing after. Yeah, the way I heard it is like this. That it was composed by Chassidim during the time of the Rebbe Marash. The Rebbe Marash, as you know, did not live long, relatively speaking. And he was also very not well. He was sickly, very... So a long period of time, the Rebbe Marash did not make any public appearances. So what did the Chassidim do? One of the times he did make a public appearance was for Chanukah lighting. Meneder. So they composed a very long song so they could be with the Rebbe as long as they could be. It's a true story. Yeah. I just find it to be very touching, you know, when you love someone, so he's already with you, so make a long song so you can stay as long as possible. So if you hear the niggin, so it also captures the ava, the love of a Chassidim to Rebbe, and every second is precious. And now when we sing the song, I think it evokes that same thing. When the Rebbe, our Rebbe came out, Chanukah Licht, it was always special. The Rebbe was, look at those candles. You see also the Frierdiker Rebbe, the last picture of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Tafshe Yud, he's also staring at the candles. The Licht was the Zuhören was the Lichter Lechem zu der Zell. So why don't we maybe sing? We'll sing with the Hartzike way, the whole Haner Salolo from the Akdame, with the accompaniment of
Choice we all on this
L'chaim. Lavrucha, yeah. I heard this story from a Holocaust survivor who lived in Colorado. So unfortunately, tragically, today we have the blessings and the power to light Chanukah in freedom without any gzeiros, decrees, no one's stopping us. This was not the case most of history. Well, during the Holocaust, as you know, the Jews did whatever they could to try to keep some spark alive. So when it came Chanukah, just as was with other Yom Tovim, they were looking some way to be able to light at least something. Now, they didn't have anything. They didn't have candles. They didn't have oil. So there was one older Jew in one of the barracks. He says the story. So one of the younger teenagers who was working in the mechanics in a plant there. So he said to him, maybe you can smuggle out, in these plants, you could smuggle out a little the oil used by mechanics to lubricate, kerosene or something like that. Maybe you can smuggle it out. It's going to be dangerous, but anyway, so he did. And he also got some type of, some shmatas, some cloth that they cut up. And it came at night. They were able to light at least one candle, I think, maybe two. But unfortunately, one of the guards saw the boy bringing these flames, and he caught him, found in his pockets, and they were going to kill him right on the spot. But this older man took the blame. He went outside, he said, there's nothing to do with this boy. He was carrying it for me, and if you want to hurt anyone, it should be me. So they planned it. They wanted to make sure he's going to be a living example for everybody in the camp, as they would love to do. They made a spectacle out of it, to really humiliate him, and they would kill him, hang him right in the middle of the whole. Anyway, the last conversation he had with this boy, and this boy is a friend of this person who told me the story. His name was Kent, I believe, was his name. He changed his name. He says the last conversation he had with this older man, he said to him, look, you did everything possible to bring the oil. And even though tonight you won't be able to light the candles, but you have to remember that there are also candles that are lit that we don't see. That the mere fact that we were ready to sacrifice, and you were ready to sacrifice. So there won't be a burning candle. It'll be an invisible candle. And that candle is the 9th candle of Chanukah. That's what he told him, the 9th candle. And 8 days we light a candle, the 9th candle will be this candle. And always remember that, no matter what happens. When you get out of this place, remember that 9th candle always burns. And it's such a powerful candle that nobody can extinguish it, because nobody can light it, nobody can see it. When this man told me the story, he started sobbing, because he was the same age as that boy. They were friends. He says that boy didn't make it. They both made it out. Unfortunately, the next day they did what they did to the older Jew. No one knew who he was. They all saw him as some type of Eliyahu Hanavi. But it's a story that always remains with me, because I heard it from a person who was there. And he said the 9th candle, it always remains with me, the 9th candle. Now, I mentioned before that I saw in one of the Farbrengens, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that there is a 9th candle that's invisible. Now, it's not necessarily connected to this story, but he said that after Chanukah ends, which will be tomorrow night, that we should remember that the candle doesn't burn out, it continues to burn, except not through Maisir De Adam. It's not we light it, the Eibishter lights it. It's like the response. After us lighting 8 candles, there's one that comes from above. So when you put all this together, come away with another appreciation of what it means, Nitzchias, Am Yisrael Chai, the idea that something lives on. Like I mentioned from the Ramban. I mean, it's a tremendous statement if you think about it, that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. The Menorah no longer, Ner Tamid is not burning now. But Haneres Halalu, Chanukah lights, Einem B'Telin Le'elam. It never disappears because it comes from, like I said, anything that comes from darkness cannot be destroyed by darkness. You can only, the darkness can be, the light can be destroyed by darkness. But if it's light that comes from darkness, you can't destroy it because it's coming from the same place. So thinking about it, today, all these stories are distant past. Thank God we're not in anything close here. We sit here, Pomona, and shuls all over the world, and homes are lighting candles in freedom. Literally nobody, even the former Soviet Union, Menorahs in public. Once upon a time, everything had to be secret. So I was thinking, we do have our own challenge. We don't have the challenges that our parents and grandparents had, but the challenge today, and I go back to what I said at the beginning of this Fabrengen, the challenge today is the opposite. We don't have enemies outside. I hear there are anti-Semites. I'm not saying there aren't, but it's not what it once was. No one's rounding us up, but no one's taking our names. No one's arresting us for celebrating Hanukkah. You know where the enemy is now, my friends? It's right here. It's inside. It's called apathy. Apathy. In Yiddish, Gleichgültigkeit, indifference, complacency. Nobody was complacent during the Holocaust. Nobody was complacent in Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. You couldn't afford to be. Everything was life and death. There was no such thing as taking for granted. Today, we're comfortable. And I say it as a bracha. Comfort is a bracha. But comfort always comes with another side. There's no sense of urgency. There's no sense of urgency. So for me, when I hear these stories, and also the very story of Hanukkah itself, can we create the urgency that the people before us, generations before us, had out of desperation? We're not desperate. Like I remember someone told me, he said to me, every time a new kosher sushi store opens or a new pishta shop, we're very comfortable. Who needs Mashiach? We have everything we need. We have every type of food. Madana Mitzrayim ka'offer. It's almost like a Guladik times. I remember once I met a journalist. He was a Jewish journalist, a secular guy. I met him in Israel. He wanted to see, take me to the inside of Jewish life, the real frum Jewish life. So I told him, meet me in Geula Friday afternoon, 3 p.m. 2 p.m. You know what it looks like. Geula. We're running and mikvahs and cholent, and that place is So we meet there. And he's looking at, and he says to me, was a very smart guy. He said to me, what is this neighborhood called? I said, Geula. So he says, if this is Geula, what does Golus look like? That's what he asked me. Okay, so the complacency. And that is a great challenge. The Baal Shem Tov says, Tzama lecha nafshi, kama lecha b'sari, ki eretz tziyah v'oyev, right? So we're thirsty, and we're pining, we're longing because we're very thirsty. We're living in Eretz Tziyah v'Oyev, in an arid, desolate land. And then it says, Kein b'kodesh chazi sicha. So the Baal Shem Tov teaches an unbelievable teach. He says, Kein b'kodesh chazi sicha. Read not Kein, but halavai b'kodesh chazi sicha. That halavai, we should have the same passion and thirst when we're desperate, when we're b'kodesh. When everything is going well, you're b'kodesh, and you see godliness, will you have the same thirst? Will you really be as hungry? Because when things are going well, you don't need to feel thirsty. This is maybe the greatest challenge of our time in the big scheme of things. How can we create that type of urgency? I saw a Yechidus in Tovshin Chov Daled, 1964. So somebody, I don't know who it was by the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he wrote up in like 6 or 7 lines what the Rebbe told him. And he said to him, The Rebbe said to him in Yiddish, he said, "As Eden sein durch alle nisyonos." The Jews went through every test and challenge. Nisayon von Anias, the test of poverty, Yisurim, affliction. And the Rebbe lists a whole bunch of different challenges. He says, Haint is the letzte Nisayon. Now is the last test. The Nisayon from Freiheit, freedom. The Eberste sagt Eden, not eich Freiheit, lo mir zen sit vel Mashiach. Here's freedom, and let's see whether you'll want Mashiach. Obviously, I'm adding, obviously when the Jews were in concentration camps or being arrested about the Mashiach, of course they wanted Mashiach. They were desperate. But here's freedom. Let's say whether you still want Mashiach. And the Rebbe concludes and says, so Mashiach is not going to come from Morocco and from Russia, from Soviet Union. Because there was Torah still then in 1964. Mashiach is going to come from America or Australia, because that's where there's Freiheit, that's where there's freedom. And God forbid it's being used for the opposite. In other words, freedom is being taken advantage of. We're free, we're comforted. So I would like to say a concluding note. What I saw literally 24/7 in the Rebbe, one of the things that most impressed me and that in many ways transformed me was a man who went to war against something that nobody went to war against. And not anti-Semitism and not outside enemies, against apathy. He refused to surrender and say, just because it's comfortable now, in 1950, when he assumed leadership, even though it's comfortable, we're no longer, World War II is over, we're living in democracy and freedom. Look at Jewish life, how it's thriving. Yes, we have our challenges, don't get me wrong. But the challenges today are coming because of the comfort, not because of the desperation, because we're too comfortable. So I'm not chas v'sholom in any way hinting that we should turn the clock back and not have comfort. Even, but according to Torah, Ashiris is a broche, physical prosperity. But as the Pasuk says, V'hoye b'yem hahu yitokeh b'shefer gadol, and what does it say? Bohu ha'evdim me'eretz Asher and nedochim me'eretz Mitzrayim. Why does it say by Eretz Mitzrayim nedochim, they're pushed aside, and by Eretz Asher it says they're lost, evdim? Because Eretz Mitzrayim is the Nesoyin of Mitzrayim, Mitzarim v'gvulim. It's poverty, Yisurim, affliction. There we're downtrodden. Nedochim, we're pushed aside. But you want to be lost, you know where you're lost? You're lost in pleasure. In Esher, Lashon from the Aleph, prosperity, comforts. When you're indulging and you're sitting in the 65 course dinners, there you get lost. It's not just downtrodden. And when you get lost, it's far harder to find somebody when they're lost. And that's the golas that we're in right now. So strangely, the blessing is the curse. And we don't want to, the blessing should remain a blessing. How do you wake up? So that's why we fabring like this. We wake ourselves up. We basically, we make each other a little uncomfortable. That's the key, in a good way. The guy that has a business card that says, I make miserable people happy and happy people miserable. That's what we need to do. I don't mean miserable, God forbid, in a bad way. I mean to say, if you're too comfortable, you're not moving, my friend, that's for sure. We need a little discomfort in a good way. So the blessing should be, everyone should be comfortable and have ashiras begashmis and beruchnis. That is a given. That was never suggested otherwise. But how do we find the halavai, b'kodesh, chazisicha? So if you have a magic formula, I'm all open to hear. I find the way to do it is just you keep forging ahead and you keep waking yourself up and waking other people up. And some of them get so uncomfortable they don't show up. And what could you do? That's life. But maybe the few that do show up, we push each other. That's the way I think it's the way to go. So hopefully we can do that. They say the difference between a speech and a party. You know the difference? By a speech, one person speaks and nobody listens. A party, everybody's speaking and nobody's listening. And a fabrengen, officially, nobody's speaking but everybody's listening. So even though you have one person speaking like me right now, but the kavanah is not that I should be speaking, but that we should all be listening to ourselves and to each other and wake each other up. So with that, I say to all of you, says Chanukah, Tovshin Pei Beis, may we wake each other up and not be complacent. So here's L'chaim to no complacency, urgency, and that drive. Anyone that saw the Rebbe, Mayan Hamiz Gaber, it never was what we call the relentless pursuit. Relentless, L'chaim, to relentlessness. What niggin is a relentless niggin? The Tanotza? What? Ja, was? Let me hear. So I'll just on the formal part of this Fabring, and I'll say L'chaim to you all. Say Chanukah. Of course. So again, Tafshin Pei Bei, some people say is Rosh Tevis Peloyas Bakoil. Should be only wonders. As I mentioned before, Shmeina, as opposed to 7, 8, is always Shemer as a Hekef. It's a transcendent Pella, a Dover Nifla. So the structure of 7 is natural. This is supernatural. So on this, says Chanukah Tavshin Pei Beis, after all the hundreds and hundreds of years of Mesiras Nefesh, of our grandparents and great-grandparents, and all the efforts that Jews have done in the past and now, the Eibishter should finally have Rachmanis and open up all the channels of brachas, especially in the area of health. Those that need a complete refuah shlema should already come to an end to this magefa and to all the different derivatives of it. And we should finally be zeicher to the gula mitis v'ashlema. You know, Chanukah, the different Sforim and Shar Yisachar, Bnei Yisachar, they bring, that's all connected to Mashiach. This is especially Zeis Chanukah, they connected to Mashiach. Mashiach is a Shmeina Nesichim, and different connections to the number 8. So we should already be Zeichet to the Gula Amitis V'Hashlema. And just remember, history is like a long marathon, and every generation carries the baton and passes it to the next generation. Our job is to finish the job and cross the finish line, but we are nonas al gaba anok. We're like midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. So we don't go alone. We come with all the generations before us. So in case you think you're a small person, you may be small, but you're standing on very big shoulders. They tell the story about, I think it was the Blozhiner Rebbe, one of the Rebbes, who was in the Holocaust. So he was with some of his Chassidim in one of the camps. And in this particular camp, you know, the Nazis, each of them had their achzorius. They had a particular game they played. And the game was, officially game, that the Jews were told to dig trenches, wide trenches, and and then they would, then the game began. They would play music, whoever could jump over the trench lives, and whoever not is shot on the spot. So one of the Chassidim tells his Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, you know, enough is enough. How much Yisurim can we be saved, can we tolerate? Let's just allow ourselves to get killed. And that's it, and return to the Eibishter. And the Rebbe said to him, that Rebbe said, no, as long as we have even 1 ounce of strength, we have to fight and fight and fight. So the game, so-called, began. The trenches were built, the Jews were jumping. In the mayhem and the whole chaos, the whole the Bahola, nobody knew who lived, who didn't live. Anyway, a few weeks later, the camps were liberated. And the Rebbe survived, and his chassid survived. They met somewhere a few weeks later, and they couldn't believe their eyes. Both of them are alive. So the chassid says to his Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, you're not a young man. How'd you jump over the trench? So he said, I closed my eyes, and I held on to the kapota of my father, and my grandfather, and my great-grandfather, and it gave me the strength to jump. And then he said to the chassid, you're also not so young. How did you jump? He said, I held on to your kapot. So the fact is, we are as strong as we are with the people that came before us. None of us are in a vacuum. One of the beautiful things about Chanukah is that that no generation did not light Chanukah candles. So from the time of the Chashmonaim back then till today, Chanukah was always burning. And these are one long chain that we are connected with. And when you count your father and your mother and your parents and grandparents, may whoever is alive should be well, but those that even have passed on, they are all forces that we hold on to. And when you're the story with Rab Meir Primashlan, when you're bound and tied above, you don't fall below. So it's all about connecting to that which is beyond us, and that carries us as we go through. That's ultimately the secret to real resilience and real strength. So the Eibishter should help us like a tree. A tree has deep roots, then it bears beautiful fruits. So our roots are very deep. They go back generations and generations. And when you hold on to that, you can really accomplish anything that you set your mind to. Nothing is impossible. L'chaim, l'chaim, to the impossible, to making the impossible possible. L'chaim, Afreilach and Chanukah, everyone. And we will now conclude. This has been streamed, so we're going to conclude here. L'chaim. Thank you.